to the Kerry Barrett Show live on this amazing Thursday morning. I don't know where you may be joining. I am in the New Jersey area, and finally, we have a little bit of sun, and it's supposed to be 82 degrees today. It's like we skipped spring entirely and went right into summer. But anyway, I hope that you're having a great week and a great morning and are looking forward to a fabulous weekend as well. So this episode of the show is really not talking about anything that's business related. I mean, I guess it is business related, but I thought it would be interesting to sort of take a break from the practical content, if you will, that I normally talk about in terms of how to get better speaking on camera, confidence, that sort of stuff, and do something that is a little bit fun here in the beginning of May. So I may be having a conversation with myself for the duration of this call. I hope I'm not, or the duration of this show. But if you have something to add, this would be the day to do it. Go ahead and drop it in the comments and I can share. But I thought it might be funny to take a look back at some of the crazy job interviews that I've been on and perhaps that you have been on as well. Things have changed, certainly, in terms of what you're able to ask and what you can't ask since I first started the job interview process way back when I finally graduated from grad school and started to look for a job. It was a little bit before I graduated, actually. So I'm going to date myself, but that was in 2000. Got my first job in the news industry in 2001. Actually, I started in January of 2001. So I don't know how much you may or may not know about the process of applying for a job in broadcast news. Probably not a lot if you haven't been in that space before, but it's a fairly tedious process in that if you have your resume, you have your cover letter, and you always send your recommendations, but you also had to have a video demo reel, right? Something that could show that you could at least coherently speak on a camera. Trust me, I was not very good back then at all. In fact, I was just bad. But they also needed to see, it's very superficial, what you looked like and what you sounded like, and what was actually going through their heads is not just, she looks okay and viewers won't maybe run and scream when they turn on the TV and she's there, but they're also looking for things like, is he or she a brunette or a blonde, and do we have too many brunettes, and do we have too many blondes, and that sort of stuff. So they're looking for all those sort of like little subjective things, or they just don't like this particular look, and there didn't have to be a reason for it. It just you weren't hired. It wasn't strictly data based, is I guess what I'm saying. So you'd send out a demo reel that back in those days you'd have to put on a VHS tape. So you're applying to, 500 jobs. You'd have a demo reel, on 500 different VHS tapes that you then would have to go to the post office and mail. Anyway, and in the course of sending out my own 500 demo reels, I got 499 rejections. And some of them were for, crazy reasons. We don't like your voice, or you sound too insecure, or you sound too young, or you're not seasoned enough on air, which was shocking to me because of course I'm not seasoned. I'm a graduate, much like all of your other applicants are, and this is for a job in Fargo, North Dakota. I think Fargo's in North Dakota. Anyway, so there's a lot of rejection that comes in that particular space. But the real crazy stories didn't actually come into play until I was interviewing a little bit further up the totem pole, if you will, a little further up the food chain and in the larger markets. And so there's really two in particular that stick out in my mind. And again, if you have crazy job interview stories, please put them in the comments and I'll pull them up on the screen. So I was working in Salt Lake City, and I had been there for about, I don't know, I guess going on 4 years at this point. And my husband was in the Air Force. He was a pilot in the Air Force out at Hill Air Force Base, if you happen to know Utah at all. And he was leaving active duty, going into the Guard, the Air National Guard, and also looking for a pilot job. But actually got hired by Delta. So, and he was based out of JFK. So we had a choice as to whether, I didn't have a job yet, as to whether we were going to move closer to New York or closer to Philly. And we decided to move closer to Philly because Philly's still a major news market. It's number 4 in the nation. New York is the biggest, then LA, then Chicago, then Philly. I just thought I had a better chance of probably getting a job in Philadelphia than I did in New York. So we moved out to Philly, and I basically just started knocking on doors digitally anyway. I'd send emails, I'd send links at this point to my demo reel or my resume tape. We still called it, even though it was a link. And phone calls, sometimes in the middle of the night, because they never answered, but I at least wanted them to hear my voice on the voicemail rather than have it picked up by a gatekeeper and not knowing for sure whether the message ever got to them. So in the process of doing all of this, I was finally called in for and I'm not going to name any of the stations or any of the people that interviewed me, but I was called in for an interview at a station. And it was such an odd experience. So I walked into the news director's office, was summoned in, and I sat down, and this person, he had my resume, or not my paper resume up in his hand, and sort of just asked me this rat-a-tat-tat sort of cadence of questions that seemed like it was designed to catch me in some sort of lie. And I couldn't quite figure out what it was. And I still don't actually know what it was. But I remember thinking very early on in the interview process, this is so weird. I'm getting a weird vibe. I don't really know what's going on here. And then I remember this question. It was about one of the first places I worked, the first place I worked, which was the one out of the 500 that finally called me back for an interview and hired me. It was in Wichita Falls, Texas. And it is in north central Texas, very close to the Oklahoma border. And it's very, very flat. There is absolutely no hills or mountains there. It's very much oil country. It's flat, and it's sparsely populated. And there's not a lot of, greenery or anything. But anyway, that's beside the point. He was like, so tell me about Wichita Falls. And I was like, tell me about it. It's my first job. I worked for KFDX, which is the NBC affiliate there. I started out as it was such a vague question. I really wasn't sure how to answer it. And then he's like, Falls. Well, that part of Texas is really flat. What do you mean falls? Why were there falls there? And I was like, well, interestingly enough, there actually did used to be a waterfall there, but it was destroyed, a small waterfall. It was destroyed in a tornado, and the falls were rebuilt, man-made, and there's actually a switch now that you could, they turn the falls off and on. I was like, the little falls, it's sort of the north part of town. And he was like, well, so there must have been a river. And I was like, yeah, there was a river. And he was like, what was the name of the river? And I could not remember. But it was almost like he thought I was lying that there were waterfalls in Wichita Falls, Texas. And so I'm like, I think it's the Wichita River, which actually happened to be the case. I didn't get that job, but it was a very, very odd interview. And then the next I did end up getting hired by that station, but after they had a new boss there. That boss only lasted for 6 months, shockingly. So the next interview was also at a station in Philadelphia. And I had flown in the night before, and there was a dear friend of mine who I had not seen in, gosh, I don't know, probably 10 years, who was living in Philadelphia at the time. And so she and I went out the night before, and I was not much of a drinker, especially not then. Business ownership has changed that a little bit. So it's motherhood, but that's another story also. So I'm not much of a drinker. When we went out to this place, if you know Philadelphia at all, you'll know there's a restaurant there called Continental. There's actually two of them. And they make a mean martini. I'm not a martini drinker, but it sounded good for some reason. I was out with my friend. We were, enjoying one another's company. We hadn't seen each other in a long time. And so I ordered a flight of martinis. All different flavors, not full size, but nevertheless, pretty much straight vodka, I guess it is. I don't even know. And so needless to say, I was feeling no pain when I walked back to my hotel room that night. And the next morning I was feeling a lot of pain. And so I woke up a little bit later than I normally would. I did not get a chance to watch this station's morning news at the time. And that's something I always do, is I watch the news of the day. Twitter wasn't a thing yet really at that point. So I wasn't, I couldn't pick up on what was going on news-wise through that either. But I usually always made a point to watch both the evening and the morning show of the particular station I was interviewing at least the day before the interview. I didn't do that. I shouldn't say I couldn't. I made bad choices. And I didn't do that. And so the other thing was, rather than Uber wasn't a thing yet there either, rather than try and get a cab, I had rented a car. And if you've ever driven in Philadelphia, you'll know that it is not, in fact, the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. And here I am, my little self, coming in from Utah, where everybody's, smiley and very happy. And I love Philadelphia. I absolutely love it. Not everybody is smiley and happy there. And so I got completely lost, went over the bridge, over into New Jersey, into Camden, which, if you know Camden in New Jersey, especially back then in 2008, this was not a place that you wanted to get lost in. Finally figured out how to redirect myself and get back over the Ben Franklin Bridge and get into Philly, but I still had no idea where I was going because the address of the station that I was trying to go interview at had changed unbeknownst to me. So I'm stuck at red lights. I'm not moving when the light is green. People are honking at me. I am, I had one person gesture to me through the window, and hearing all my naivete from Utah, I thought he was trying to be helpful. And I rolled down my window and I was like, yeah, I'm lost. Please help me. And he's like, I don't fucking care. Move. So then I'm frantically calling the station. At this point, I'm a half an hour late, and I can smell the alcohol on my skin. I'm calling the station. I'm trying to describe where I am to the woman in the lobby by telling her what the skyline looks like. These are the buildings that are in front of me. It's kind of tall, and it has a, PFSS, whatever logo on the top. It was a mess. I finally arrived to the station a full hour late, sweaty, pale, frazzled, anxious. It was by far the least prepared, obviously, of any interview I have ever been on in my life. I walked into the station fully expecting to be dismissed, but profusely apologizing. And the news director, to my shock and awe, actually brought me in, and I had a very lengthy interview. But here's where it gets even a little bit more weird. I was at the interview for probably 4 hours. I met the news director, the assistant news director, the general manager, some of the producers. But when the news director sat me down, and this news director was a woman, the first thing she said to me was, well, I watched your resume tape, and I don't really like you. And you may have seen me post about this when I talked about this live event. She said to me, you remind me of the pretty girl in high school who all the boys liked, but she was a total bitch to everybody else. And I didn't know how to respond to that. So I responded like, I don't know if this helps me at all, but I was a complete nerd in high school and painfully shy, and I barely had any friends, let alone a boyfriend. Definitely not boyfriend with an S on the end. There were no plural, there were no boyfriends. And so we ended up having a nice conversation, but she also said things to me like, well, your name is very similar to the last name of another news anchor we have here at the station, and you're also a blonde, and well, what did you think of our morning anchor? And at this point, as I mentioned, I didn't watch the morning show. I had no idea who their morning anchor was, and I didn't want to tell her that this was a bad choice. I got away with it, but don't ever do this. So I'm like, I don't really know. And she's like, what color hair did she have? And I'm like, oh God. So I just took a stab. This was a wild guess. I'm like, she's a blonde. And she's like, see, that's the thing. All you know is her hair color. She's so unmemorable. You don't even remember what she was like sitting on that desk. That's the problem we have with her. Nobody remembers who she is. She's just not memorable. It was a wild stab. So I got that right. By the way, she was not unmemorable. She was a lovely lady and very, very good at her job. She also had a very similar last name to me. So we get through this weird interview where she tells me that she thought I was a bitch, but that I'm actually quite warm, and that I have the hair color that I shouldn't have and a last name that is too similar to somebody else that works there. And the problem with their on-air talent is that none of them are memorable. Nevertheless, that sort of conversation went on for approximately 3 hours. And she was like, I'd like you to meet the general manager. So she called the general manager, and I went upstairs to talk to him. And I had about an hour-long interview with him. And he asked me if I had a lisp. And I said, well, I don't know. I've never been told that I have a lisp, but perhaps I do. And now, of course, I'm thinking about my S's and how I'm saying them and whether or not I do in fact have a lisp. And if I do, why didn't anybody tell me? And maybe this is why I can't get a job. And of course, my mind is going a million miles an hour, but he kept me in for an interview for an hour. The oddest thing is that interview lasted a good 5 hours. And at least 4.5. And I met all the big people. They all seemed to like me. They all asked me really weird questions. And then I ended up not getting the job. Nevertheless, I got another one in Philadelphia as well. And then really the last job that I interviewed for when I was in the news industry was the job that took me up to NBC in New York City. And the news director is a delightful woman. She's not there any longer. She's in another department, still at NBC. But I remember she brought me in for an interview, and she said, okay, here's the deal. Like, your general manager, you're going to have to go talk to him. Don't bullshit him. He's a no bullshit kind of guy. Like, just answer his questions. We're already rooting for you. She kind of prepped me for what to expect with him, which was very kind. She was my advocate. And this is a local news station. Okay. We're not doing a lot of deep international political news. We're certainly covering the events of the day as they apply to, this is in 2014 that I was interviewing. We're certainly, looking at political events of the day and current events nationally and internationally, but it's not a political show. We don't do deep political interviews or whatever. And then he asked me about the geopolitics of the Syrian leader, Assad. I'm spacing on his name, of Assad. Sorry. And sorry, it's still early this morning. And I didn't have an answer for him. I did not know how. He's like, what do you think of the internal Russian politics as they relate to Assad, the Syrian leader? I had no idea what to say. And I'm like, I answered it that way. I don't really have a good answer for you. I think that this person is a master manipulator, and I can't remember what I added in to try and fluff up my answer a little bit. And then I said, but if you really wanted a deep answer on what exactly is my opinion on the geopolitical turmoil within the Russian and Syrian government, I would need to do a little bit more research and get back to you. And I thought for sure at that point I'd completely trashed the interview. I thought it was over. I thought I was never going to work there. I walked out of that interview about a half an hour later, and maybe 45 minutes, walked back to the news director, and she was like, how did it go? And I'm like, well, he asked me about this, so I don't think it went all that well. Nevertheless, I got the position. So I don't know. I don't see a ton of comments in the chat, which means hopefully that you haven't had to deal with any of the craziness that I have had to deal with, although I'm very sure that to some degree we all have crazy interview experiences that we could share. And maybe we don't want to share them in the chat because there are some identifying characteristics that we would not like to pin upon ourselves. And I'll go back and look in the DMs or in my emails, and I'll see that there is, in fact, some wild stories that you have shared. And if I reshare any of them, I promise not to use your name. Just teasing. I won't reshare them. All right. I am going to wrap up this show with that final story. And I hope that at least it's maybe giving you a little bit of a chuckle on this Thursday morning. Next Thursday, let me look up very quickly what our topic is, because we are changing gears a little bit as we sometimes do, or as I sometimes do on the show. And next Thursday, we are going to be talking about, I'm going to look this up for you. Should have had this ready to go, and I apologize for not having it ready to go. And I hope you all have amazing plans and something fun going on this weekend. Next Thursday, we are talking about, yes, why some people are absolutely fantastic talking on a stage, actually in person and in front of people, and why others are really bad at speaking on the stage in front of people and are instead very good at speaking on a camera in an environment much like this. There are some people who are good at both. Usually they excel at one a little bit more than the other. I think I'm pretty good at both. I probably excel to a greater degree speaking on camera because I've done it for longer than I have speaking on a stage. But very often somebody will assume because they're good at speaking on a stage, they're also going to be good at speaking on a camera and vice versa. So we're going to talk about why that is not necessarily the case and what are the distinctions between somebody who has perhaps a greater skill developed in one or the other, or perhaps even slightly more innate talent in one particular format or another. So anyway, with that said, thank you for watching the Kerry Barrett Show. If you are listening to this podcast and you have questions about how I might be able to help you hone your skills speaking on camera or with PR and public speaking, go ahead and click the link in the show notes and book a call, or you can go to my website, kerrybarrett.com/resources, and you will find links to book a call and also bunch of free resources that will help you get you started on your public speaking journey. That said, have a wonderful Thursday. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time.